People fear strength, but they fear unpredictability even more. Because the moment nobody can predict your next move, nobody feels completely safe against you. Welcome to Career Canvas Power, where transformation becomes your identity. Here, we turn knowledge into real power for your life. People think power belongs to the strongest person in the room. Some think power belongs to the richest person, the loudest person, or the person with the biggest title. But history repeatedly shows something deeper. Real power often belongs to the person no one can completely read. Human beings desperately search for patterns, because patterns make life feel safe. We want to know who will support us, who will oppose us, who will smile, who will attack, and what will happen next. Predictability gives comfort. It creates certainty. But the moment people fully understand your behavior, they begin creating a map of your mind. They start saying, "I know exactly what he will do." And the moment someone predicts your next move, part of your power quietly leaves your hands. Because now they prepare before you arrive. They build defenses before you attack. They manipulate before you act. This law teaches something ruthless yet powerful. If the world can read you like an open book, it can control your story. But if your actions carry mystery, if your moves create questions instead of answers, people become careful around you. They pause. They think twice. Because uncertainty creates tension, and tension creates influence. In life, never become so predictable that people stop respecting your ability to surprise them. Human beings are creatures of habit. We wake up at the same time, think in familiar patterns, react with familiar emotions, and repeat behaviors without realizing it. People study these habits every day. Friends do it, enemies do it, competitors do it, society does it. People constantly observe one another because understanding behavior creates control. Once someone knows your emotional triggers, your reactions, your weaknesses, and your routines, they no longer fear uncertainty, they feel comfortable. And comfort removes caution. Imagine a person who gets angry at every insult. After some time everyone knows exactly how to provoke him. Imagine a person who always says yes, always forgives, always behaves in expected ways. People begin using that predictability against him. They know the script before the scene even begins. Law 17 turns this idea upside down. It says do not become a machine whose buttons everyone can press. Sometimes move differently. Sometimes remain silent when people expect anger. Sometimes step back when people expect aggression. Sometimes speak when people expect silence. Not to become fake, but to avoid becoming completely readable. Because when people stop understanding your exact pattern, they become mentally unsettled. They start wondering, they start analyzing, and while they spend energy trying to understand you, you gain room to move freely. The brutal reality of life is this: predictability creates weakness, uncertainty creates power. Think about it carefully. Every day people are collecting information about you without announcing it. They observe your habits. They study your routines. They notice how you react under pressure. They remember what makes you emotional, what makes you afraid, and what makes you lose control. At first this may seem harmless. But slowly, a pattern forms. And patterns become chains. The moment people believe they understand your thinking, they start acting ahead of you. They predict your decisions before you make them. They prepare answers before you ask questions. They create strategies against you before you even enter the battlefield. That is why many people lose, not because they lack intelligence, but because they become too easy to read. They become predictable stories with predictable endings. But powerful people understand something different. They understand that mystery creates psychological pressure. When people cannot predict your next step, they become cautious. Their minds become restless. They begin asking questions. Was he planning? Why did she react like that? What happens next? And while they are trapped inside uncertainty, your position becomes stronger. But understand this carefully: this law is not telling you to become random, foolish, or chaotic. There is a difference between strategic unpredictability and emotional instability. A person without control is dangerous to himself. But a person who intentionally controls when to reveal and when to conceal becomes difficult to manipulate. In life, do not hand people the complete instruction manual to your mind. Keep your discipline, keep your values, but never become so repetitive that others start treating you like a solved puzzle. Because the moment the world thinks it has figured you out, it stops respecting your potential. And sometimes the most powerful move is reminding people that there is still a side of you they have not understood yet. The foundation of this law can be expressed in one powerful idea: what people cannot predict, they struggle to control. This principle appears again and again in life, whether in competition, leadership, business, or human relationships. People naturally look for patterns because patterns reduce uncertainty. Once they discover your habits, they begin feeling confident around you. They know how to approach you, how to influence you, and sometimes even how to use your own behavior against you. A predictable person becomes easier to manipulate because his reactions arrive exactly where others expect them. He becomes easier to deceive because people know where his attention usually goes. He becomes easier to prepare against because his moves stop creating surprise. Over time, repeated behavior creates a kind of roadmap. And once a roadmap exists, opponents no longer travel through uncertainty, they travel with direction. But when familiar patterns occasionally break, something changes inside the minds of others. Confidence becomes weaker. Assumptions begin collapsing. People start slowing down because they are no longer certain that yesterday's strategy will work tomorrow. That uncertainty creates hesitation, and hesitation often shifts the balance of power. Many battles are influenced long before action begins, because psychological pressure changes how people think before they even make a move. Human beings are deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty, because the mind constantly searches for stability. People want answers. They want structure. They want to know what comes next because certainty creates emotional relief. This is why individuals often place labels on others. They say, "I understand him," or "I know exactly how she behaves." Those conclusions create a feeling of security. But watch what happens when someone suddenly becomes difficult to predict. The mind immediately begins working harder. Caution increases. Small details receive more attention. Thoughts become heavier. Questions start appearing without invitation. Why was the reaction different? What changed? What could happen next? These unanswered questions create tension because human beings dislike gaps in understanding. As uncertainty grows, overthinking grows with it. Confidence slowly begins losing strength because confidence often depends on feeling certain about a situation. This is why unpredictability can create psychological pressure. Mental energy starts moving toward analysis instead of action. Focus becomes divided, and while one person remains calm and clear, another person may become trapped in endless thinking. Psychological exhaustion does not always come from difficult work. Sometimes it comes from carrying unanswered questions for too long. Uncertainty carries a strange kind of power, because it changes behavior before it changes outcomes. A person who feels certain often acts quickly and confidently. He moves with clarity because he believes he understands the situation in front of him. But remove certainty, and a different process begins. Caution enters the mind. Decisions become slower. Confidence becomes less stable. People begin watching more carefully because they no longer trust their assumptions. This is where unpredictability creates influence. It forces others to remain alert. It pushes them to spend time analyzing actions, words, and reactions. They begin searching for hidden meanings and possible outcomes. Energy that could have been used for action now gets consumed by observation and calculation. As this continues, hesitation begins appearing. And hesitation matters because delay changes opportunities, decisions, and outcomes. Human beings often fear what they cannot fully understand. The unknown creates possibilities, and possibilities can sometimes feel more powerful than reality itself. History repeatedly shows that uncertainty affects people not only through events, but through imagination. The mind begins creating scenarios, risks, and expectations that may never happen. That is why mystery has influence. Not because mystery automatically creates fear, but because uncertainty forces people to think carefully before moving forward. And in many situations, the person who causes others to hesitate gains an advantage without saying a single word. The hidden strength inside this law is often misunderstood. Many people hear the word unpredictable and immediately imagine acting randomly, changing behavior every hour, or becoming impossible to understand. But that is not strategy, that is confusion. Randomness creates disorder, and disorder eventually damages the person creating it. True unpredictability is controlled. It operates with purpose. Think of it like a skilled chess player. The goal is not to move pieces without thought. The goal is to make movements that others cannot easily anticipate, while still following a clear strategy. Your mission should remain stable. Your values should remain stable. Your direction should remain stable. But your methods do not always need to follow identical patterns. Occasionally break routines. Occasionally respond differently than expected. Sometimes remain silent when people expect long explanations. Sometimes stay calm when others are waiting for emotional reactions. These moments interrupt assumptions and remind people that they have not completely solved you. The objective is not to create chaos around your life. The objective is to create enough uncertainty that people stop becoming overconfident in their understanding of you. Strategic unpredictability creates space. Chaos destroys it. History offers a difficult lesson. Many powerful rulers, military commanders, and leaders did not collapse because they lacked intelligence or strength. They failed because success slowly turned into repetition. A strategy works once, then twice, then several times. Confidence grows. Eventually people begin believing that the same approach will always protect them. What begins as confidence quietly becomes routine, and routine slowly becomes vulnerability. Opponents watch these patterns carefully. They observe decisions, movements, and habits. They look for repetition because repetition reveals structure. Once that structure becomes visible, preparation becomes easier. Enemies no longer face uncertainty, they begin facing familiarity. They predict movements before they happen. They prepare responses in advance. They create traps exactly where they expect actions to occur. And that is where danger appears. A repeated pattern can become an invitation. It tells observers where to look and when to act. The lesson is larger than war or politics. In life, repeating the same reactions, approaches, and methods forever can quietly reduce your advantage. Patterns should create discipline, but they should never become cages. Because the moment others possess a complete roadmap to your behavior, they gain information that can eventually be used against you. One of the most discussed examples connected with this law involved Richard Nixon and a strategy later called the Madman theory. During periods of international tension, Nixon attempted to create an image of unpredictability. The goal was not simple irrational behavior. The strategy worked on a psychological idea: if opponents believed his reactions could not be fully anticipated, they might become more cautious in their decisions. The message was subtle but powerful: uncertainty changes calculations. When people feel certain about someone's limits, they act with greater confidence. They test boundaries because they believe they understand the situation. But uncertainty creates hesitation. Opponents begin considering possibilities they cannot clearly measure. Questions replace confidence. Caution replaces assumptions. Whether the strategy succeeded in every situation remains debated, but the psychological principle behind it became important. Human beings do not react only to actions, they also react to possibilities. Often the fear of an unknown response becomes as influential as the response itself. This reveals a deeper lesson about human behavior. People frequently become more careful around situations they cannot confidently explain. Mystery changes perception. Uncertainty influences decisions. And sometimes influence begins not with force, but with the simple fact that others cannot fully predict what comes next. As this law unfolds, several deeper lessons begin to appear beneath the surface. First, predictability creates vulnerability because repeated behavior slowly turns into information. Information becomes understanding, and understanding can become control. Second, uncertainty creates psychological pressure because the human mind prefers clarity over doubt. When people cannot fully explain your actions, they become more cautious with their assumptions. Third, mystery naturally increases influence. Human attention is often drawn toward what remains unfinished, unanswered, or partially hidden. Another insight appears in the way fear operates. Fear does not always grow from danger itself. Many times it grows from uncertainty about what could happen. Possibilities often create more tension than facts. Controlled unpredictability also weakens opponents because confusion interrupts momentum. A person who pauses to analyze every move spends less time acting. And hesitation changes outcomes. The larger lesson is this: power does not always come from forcing people backward. Sometimes power appears when uncertainty causes others to slow themselves down. Every powerful idea becomes dangerous when used without balance, and this law is no exception. Unpredictability can create influence, but excessive unpredictability creates instability. There is an important difference. If people never know where they stand with you, trust begins weakening. Friends become uncertain, partners become uncomfortable, teams become cautious in unhealthy ways. Imagine someone whose behavior changes constantly without reason. One day he supports people, the next day he disappears. One day he remains calm, the next day he reacts without warning. Instead of creating respect, that behavior creates confusion and distance. Random actions without purpose eventually damage relationships and credibility. Human beings need some level of consistency to feel secure. Stability builds trust, and trust allows cooperation. This is why unpredictability should never become your entire personality. It should remain a selective tool rather than a permanent identity. Use it with intention, not impulse. Because strategy creates influence, while chaos slowly destroys confidence from both sides. True understanding of any law requires knowing where its limits exist. There are situations where predictability becomes valuable and even necessary. Leadership often depends on stability because people follow individuals they can trust. Trust itself grows through consistency. Relationships become stronger when people feel reliability instead of uncertainty. Families, friendships, partnerships, and teams usually require emotional security. If people never understand your values, your principles, or your intentions, cooperation becomes difficult. Loyalty begins weakening because uncertainty can create distance when used excessively. A person who keeps everyone guessing at all times may eventually create caution where trust should exist. This reveals an important truth: certainty also has power. Stability can create confidence. Reliability can create loyalty. Consistency can create strength. The goal, therefore, is not permanent unpredictability. The goal is balance. Keep your values dependable. Keep your purpose visible. Let people trust your character. But avoid becoming so repetitive in your methods that others begin predicting every move. Mastery comes from combining stability with selective unpredictability. Strong roots and flexible movement often create greater power than either extreme alone. Knowledge becomes valuable only when it enters real life. Begin by observing your own patterns. Notice how often your reactions follow identical paths. Pay attention to routines that have become automatic. Ask an uncomfortable question: if someone carefully watched my behavior for a month, could they predict my responses with accuracy? If the answer is yes, there may be areas where your patterns have become too visible. Avoid repeating identical approaches in every situation. Occasionally change routines. Occasionally adjust responses. Keep some intentions private instead of explaining every thought and every future plan. Not every goal needs immediate announcement. Not every strategy needs public discussion. Learn the value of timing. Learn the value of surprise. Sometimes a delayed reaction says more than an immediate one. Sometimes silence creates more curiosity than explanation. This does not mean becoming secretive about everything. It simply means preserving enough flexibility that others cannot fully map your behavior. Curiosity often keeps attention alive, and controlled unpredictability can create room to move without unnecessary interference. Law 17 reveals a quiet reality about human behavior and power. Predictability may feel comfortable because routines create order and familiarity, but complete predictability can slowly reduce advantage by allowing others to study, anticipate, and prepare against your behavior. Once people believe they have fully understood your patterns, they begin acting with greater certainty around you. Strategic unpredictability interrupts that certainty. It creates hesitation, caution, and psychological pressure. because people naturally become more careful around situations they cannot fully predict. Yet the law carries an important warning: unpredictability without purpose becomes instability, and instability weakens trust. The goal is never confusion for its own sake. The goal is measured uncertainty guided by discipline. Keep your principles stable. Keep your purpose clear. Let people trust your character while leaving enough flexibility in your actions that assumptions become difficult. In the end, strength is not always about being impossible to understand. Sometimes strength comes from knowing exactly how much of yourself to reveal and how much to leave unknown. Because people often move confidently around certainty, but they become far more careful when certainty disappears. Thank you. Remember, real power comes from understanding and applying. Stay connected with Career Canvas Power, your transformation continues.